Nathan Carter had always dreamed of a quiet life in Oak Ridge Hills. A retired carpenter, he had spent years perfecting his garden and workshop, where he crafted handmade furniture. Life was simple, peaceful, until one morning he stepped into his backyard and found himself ankle-deep in a foul-smelling brown sludge. The stench hit him like a freight train. It wasn't just mud. It was raw sewage, bubbling up from somewhere upstream, seeping into his soil, drowning his vegetable garden, and soaking into the foundation of his workshop. His tools, his work, his years of labor, ruined in a single day. Nathan immediately called the Oak Ridge Hills Homeowners Association, HOA. After waiting on hold for 20 minutes, he was greeted by the sharp, dismissive voice of Linda Whitmore, the HOA president. "Mr. Carter, we're very busy today," she said, already sounding annoyed. Nathan explained the disaster unfolding in his yard, expecting urgency, if not sympathy. Instead, Linda sighed. "We authorized some plumbing updates last week. This is probably just a temporary side effect." Nathan's grip on the phone tightened. "Temporary? My yard is a sewage swamp." Linda simply chuckled. "Maybe you should have chosen a better place to live." Nathan knew in that moment this wasn't an accident. It was a battle. Nathan Carter hung up the phone, his blood boiling. He had lived in Oak Ridge Hills for over a decade, paying his dues, maintaining his property, and contributing to the community. Yet Linda Whitmore and her HOA cronies had always treated him like an outsider. His house wasn't as fancy as theirs. He drove an old Chevy instead of a brand-new European sedan. And worst of all, he actually worked with his hands instead of sitting in an office all day. But this wasn't just about classism. This was calculated. Determined to find answers, Nathan grabbed a flashlight and followed the flow of sewage up the hill. He moved past neatly trimmed hedges and pristine lawns until he found something shocking. A large PVC pipe, newly installed, spewing waste directly onto his land. It was hidden behind bushes out of sight of the main road. Someone had deliberately redirected the neighborhood's waste system onto his property. As he took pictures, a voice interrupted him. "Evening, Nathan," came the oily tone of Robert Langley, the HOA treasurer, who was walking his expensive-looking beagle. "Something wrong?" Nathan pointed at the pipe. "You tell me, Robert. This wasn't here last week." Robert frowned, keeping his distance from the mess. "Huh. Must be a county thing. Have you called them?" Nathan clenched his jaw. "Linda told me the HOA authorized plumbing work. Are you saying she lied?" Robert's eyes flickered with something. Nervousness, maybe. "I wouldn't put words in Linda's mouth. If there's an issue, I'm sure it'll get sorted out in due time." Then, just like that, he turned on his heel and walked away, whistling as if nothing was wrong. Nathan knew at that moment that the HOA wasn't just ignoring him. They were covering something up. By day 3, the smell had become unbearable. His neighbors on both sides had started complaining. Not to the HOA, but to him. Linda had spread a rumor that Nathan's septic system had failed, making him look like the culprit. That night, he attended the monthly HOA meeting, armed with his photos, videos, and mounting frustration. When it was finally his turn to speak, Linda barely looked up from her phone. 3 minutes, Nathan," she said flatly. Nathan didn't waste a second. He projected his images onto the community center's screen. "This pipe was installed last week. It's dumping raw sewage onto my land. My property is ruined, and this is an environmental hazard." Murmurs spread through the crowd. People exchanged uneasy glances. Linda simply crossed her arms. "I have no record of this." Nathan smirked. Then why did you admit to authorizing the plumbing changes when I called on Tuesday? Silence. Linda's expression flickered, just for a second, before she scoffed. I said no such thing. Nathan leaned in. I recorded our call. Her face went pale. For the first time, she looked nervous. The room went silent. Nathan Carter locked eyes with Linda Whitmore, watching as her confident smirk faltered. You recorded me? She asked, her voice strained. Nathan didn't blink. That's right. It was a bluff, of course. He hadn't recorded anything, but the way Linda's face turned ghostly white told him everything he needed to know. She was scared. Before she could recover, Robert Langley, the HOA treasurer, cleared his throat. Even if that were true, Nathan, recording someone without their consent is illegal in this state. Nathan raised an eyebrow. So you're admitting she said it? Robert's mouth snapped shut. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some of the homeowners were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly unsure of the HOA board they had trusted for years. Nathan pressed forward. You people have been lying to me from the start. You knew exactly what was happening on my property, and instead of fixing it, you tried to blame me. Linda finally found her voice again. That's enough, Nathan. Your time is up. She aggressively tapped her phone's timer, as if that would make the situation disappear. But it wasn't going away. As Nathan gathered his things, he noticed something interesting. A few of his neighbors, ones who had avoided eye contact with him before, were now looking at him with sympathy. One older woman even patted his arm as he walked past. Outside, as Nathan stepped into the cold night air, a voice called out behind him. Hey, Carter, right? Nathan turned to see a man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes. I'm Daniel Holloway, the man said, lowering his voice. They did the same thing to me last year. Nathan's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Daniel sighed. My property was on a lot they wanted to develop. One day my basement started flooding. HOA said it was my problem. When I fought back, they buried me in fines. I couldn't afford to keep going, so I sold my house for way less than it was worth. He scoffed bitterly. Guess who bought it? Linda's brother-in-law? Flipped it for double in 6 months. Nathan felt his fists clench. So they're running people out on purpose. Daniel nodded. And they'll do it to you too, unless you find a way to fight back. Nathan exhaled slowly. He wasn't the only victim. How many others had been forced out? How much money had the HOA made by destroying people's lives? As he drove home, he spotted Linda and Robert standing at the edge of his ruined yard, pointing and whispering. The moment they saw his truck, they scattered. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep, not because of the smell, but because of the rage boiling inside him. This wasn't negligence. This was war. And if the HOA wanted a fight, they had no idea what was coming. Nathan Carter sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by the stench of sewage and the wreckage of his once beautiful backyard. His garden was destroyed. His workshop, where he had spent years crafting handmade furniture, was now a toxic swamp. His dog, Duke, refused to go outside. And now, he knew the truth. This wasn't an accident. The HOA had been targeting homeowners for years, forcing them to sell at a loss so Linda Whitmore and her connections could profit. Daniel Holloway had been one of many victims. Nathan was just the latest. The rage in his chest was like a slow-burning fire. He needed proof. More than just photos and videos. He needed something that would force the authorities to act. The next morning, he called Stanley Martinez, a plumber his friend had recommended. I need someone who's not afraid of going up against an HOA, Nathan said. Sounds like my kind of job, Stanley replied. An hour later, a beat-up work truck pulled into Nathan's driveway. Stanley, a wiry man in his 50s with sharp eyes, stepped out and took one look at the disaster before whistling. "Damn, son, they really did a number on you." Nathan led him to the source of the sewage. Stanley got to work, using specialized equipment to trace the flow. It didn't take long before he uncovered something shocking. "This ain't just regular sewage, my friend," Stanley muttered, pointing to the readings on his scanner. "See these chemicals? This is industrial-grade plumbing waste, the kind used in commercial buildings." Nathan frowned. "What are you saying?" Stanley stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm saying this didn't come from the houses in your neighborhood. This came from a big facility. A community center, maybe? Or a luxury spa?" Nathan's blood ran cold. The HOA just built a spa inside their office building. Stanley shook his head. "Then I think we just found your culprit." He continued digging, following the underground pipes until he made another discovery, one that made Nathan's stomach turn. "Here's your smoking gun," Stanley said, pointing to a thick, newly installed PVC pipe. This was put in recently. Instead of connecting to the main sewer line, they rerouted their waste straight into your property, saved themselves a fortune in drainage costs at your expense. Nathan exhaled, his fists clenching. How much did they save? Stanley did some rough calculations. Easily over $50,000, maybe more. Nathan let out a slow, bitter laugh. "So they ruined my home to save money." "Looks that way," Stanley said. "And from what I can tell, they never filed permits for this. If you take this to the county, they'll be in deep trouble." Nathan took a deep breath. He finally had what he needed. Now, it was time to use it. Nathan Carter sat in his truck, gripping the report Stanley Martinez had given him. This wasn't just negligence. It was criminal. The Oak Ridge Hills HOA had rerouted sewage from their luxury spa, dumping it straight into his yard to save themselves tens of thousands of dollars. And they thought they could get away with it. That night, Nathan's inbox pinged. Someone had accidentally copied every resident on an HOA email chain. His eyes widened as he read, "The Carter situation is under control. We'll keep denying any knowledge until he gives up. These working-class types can't afford lawyers anyway. Once he sells, the expansion can move forward." His grip on the phone tightened. So that was their plan. To drive him out. Just like they had done to Daniel Holloway. Nathan wasn't just angry anymore. He was ready for war. The next morning, he gathered a small group of neighbors, the ones who had shown him sympathy at the HOA meeting. He invited them over for coffee, sharing everything he had found. Jennifer Williams, a woman in a wheelchair, shook her head. "They denied my request for a ramp 3 times, said it ruined the aesthetic. I had to pay for it myself, then they fined me anyway." Michael Chen nodded. "They fined me $500 a day until I removed my solar panels, even though state law protects them." One by one, they shared their own HOA horror stories. By the end of the meeting, they had formed the Oak Ridge Homeowners for fair treatment. Nathan leaned forward. "I've tried playing by the rules, but they don't fight fair. So why should we?" Jennifer gave him a wary look. "What are you thinking?" Nathan smirked. A little taste of their own medicine. That evening, he met with his cousin Ryan, who owned Carter Concrete, a small family business. "How much concrete can your truck hold?" Nathan asked. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Nathan explained everything, The sewage, the emails, the corruption. By the time he finished, Ryan was shaking his head in disbelief. Those bastards. Nathan leaned in. I want to flood their office, just like they flooded my home. Ryan hesitated. That's destruction of property, man. You could get arrested. Nathan smirked. What if it wasn't permanent? Ryan frowned. What do you mean? You know that industrial construction foam you used on the Johnson project? Looks like concrete, hardens like concrete, but dissolves with a special enzyme? Ryan's eyes lit up. Oh. Nathan nodded. We make a statement. No permanent damage, just a massive inconvenience. Ryan chuckled. You're insane. Nathan shrugged. They wanted to drown me in sewage. I think it's only fair I return the favor. Ryan grinned. All right, let's do it. Tomorrow night, the HOA would learn what it felt like to be buried alive. Nathan Carter stood outside the Oak Ridge Hills HOA office, the cool night air buzzing with anticipation. This was it. Months of mistreatment, thousands of dollars in damage, and a neighborhood full of homeowners too afraid to fight back had led to this moment. His cousin Ryan parked the concrete truck 2 blocks away, its company logo covered with a temporary county maintenance magnet. The plan was airtight. The security cameras were fake, just for show. The office was empty for the week due to renovations. By the time anyone found out, it would be too late. You sure about this? Ryan whispered. Nathan nodded. They flooded my land with sewage. I'm just giving them a taste of their own medicine. They moved quickly. Nathan picked the back door's lock. Thank you, YouTube tutorials, and slipped inside. The office smelled like fresh paint, newly installed countertops gleaming under the dim light. Hope they like their upgrades, Nathan muttered. He ran the industrial hose from the truck through the mail slot, securing it in place. Ryan started the pump. Within seconds, the thick gray construction foam poured into the office, creeping like a slow-moving flood. Nathan directed the hose with precision. What is Linda's desk? Buried? The filing cabinets full of ridiculous HOA fines? Gone. Her special leather chair, the one she refused to let anyone else sit in, sinking into the growing foam. The foam hardened within minutes, setting just enough to look exactly like concrete. It would take the HOA days to figure out how to remove it, and even longer to clean up the mess. As a final touch, Nathan pressed his gloved hand into Linda's desk, leaving a perfect imprint before pulling it out. His signature. All right, Ryan whispered. Let's move. As they packed up, Mrs. Gonzalez, an elderly neighbor who had been fined for having non-regulation rose bushes, peeked through her window. Their eyes met. She gave Nathan a slow, approving nod, then closed her curtains. By 4:30 a.m., the job was done. Nathan tossed his gloves into a dumpster 5 blocks away, then walked home, heart hammering. Would this work? Would it backfire? At 8:30 a.m. sharp, his hidden cameras caught the moment Linda Whitmore unlocked her office door, then screamed. The HOA board members gathered, staring in horror at what looked like 20,000 pounds of solid concrete entombing their office. Linda's face turned redder than a fire truck. "Carter!" she shrieked, somehow knowing it was him. Nathan sipped his coffee, watching the chaos unfold. But just as he was reveling in his success, an unfamiliar car pulled into his driveway. A man in a suit stepped out. "Mr. Carter," he said, flashing a badge. "I'm Daniel Wright from the district attorney's office. I think you're going to want to hear this." Nathan's smirk faded. Had he just made the biggest mistake of his life? Nathan Carter's heart pounded as Daniel Wright, The district attorney's investigator handed him a folder. "We received your complaint about the sewage dumping," Wright said, "but this is bigger than we thought." Nathan flipped through the documents. Bank records, internal emails, signed contracts. His breath caught in his throat. "Linda Whitmore has been under investigation for 6 months," Wright continued. "We've been gathering evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and environmental violations. But your case? It's the missing piece we needed." Nathan exhaled slowly. He had set out to expose the HOA's corruption, but now he was holding the evidence that would bring them down. Just then, a commotion erupted down the street. Linda and the other HOA board members stood frozen outside their ruined office, staring at the solid gray mass of hardened foam. Nathan sipped his coffee, savoring the chaos. A news van pulled up. A reporter jumped out, shoving a microphone toward Linda. "Mrs. Whitmore, what happened here?" Linda's face twisted in fury. "That criminal filled our office with concrete. He should be arrested." She jabbed a shaking finger toward Nathan's house. The reporter turned. "Mr. Carter, do you have a response?" Nathan smiled. "I'm not here to talk about concrete. I'm here because Mr. Wright has something important to share." The DA investigator stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, your office is under investigation for financial misconduct, illegal sewage disposal, and fraud. We have evidence that you knowingly redirected waste onto Mr. Carter's property to save your own development project." Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. Linda's face went from red to pale. "This is outrageous. You can't prove anything." "We can, actually," Wright said, holding up a signed contract. "This is your approval for the illegal pipeline." Just then, the HOA treasurer, Robert Langley, bolted for his car. 2 officers tackled him before he made it 10 feet, spilling bank statements showing millions in missing HOA funds onto the pavement. Linda staggered back, realizing there was nowhere left to run. By noon, she and Robert were in handcuffs. The remaining board members resigned immediately. Neighbors who had once ignored Nathan now shook his hand, patted his back, and thanked him for standing up to the corruption. At the emergency meeting, Jennifer Williams, the woman the HOA had denied a wheelchair ramp, was voted the new HOA president. Her first act? Approving her own ramp and reinstating Michael Chen's solar panels. "Would you like a seat on the board?" Jennifer asked Nathan. He chuckled. "No thanks. I've had enough HOA drama for a lifetime, but I'll help with the community garden." 6 months later, Nathan's yard was thriving again. His tomatoes grew bigger than ever, thanks to the fresh soil paid for by the HOA's insurance. And on his desk sat a small mounted piece of the hardened foam, a gift from Wright. A reminder that even the most patient man has a breaking point. Nathan Carter never set out to be a hero. He was just a man who wanted to be left alone, to live his life in peace. But when the HOA flooded his land with sewage and tried to ruin him, he had 2 choices: give up or fight back. Instead of rolling over, he exposed their corruption, proving that no amount of power or money can protect people from justice forever. His story wasn't just about revenge. It was about standing up to bullies, no matter how powerful they seemed. And in the end, the HOA fell, justice was served, and Nathan got his home back, stronger than ever. Homeowners associations, HOAs, are meant to protect communities, but when corrupt individuals take control, they can destroy lives. Nathan's story is a reminder that documentation, persistence, and courage are the best weapons against injustice. If you ever find yourself facing unfair treatment, remember, gather evidence. Photos, emails, and recorded conversations can make all the difference. Find allies. Strength comes in numbers. Don't fight alone. Use the law to your advantage. Bureaucracy is slow, but it works in the long run. And most importantly, never let people walk all over you. Because when pushed too far, even the quietest person can shake an entire system.